A man straightens the collar of his starched shirt and takes a sip from a crystal glass. He sits in a cozy, dimly lit bedroom on Telegraph Hill, one of San Francisco's most bohemian and prestigious neighborhoods. On the bed beside him is a beautiful woman in an evening gown, whom he met just an hour ago in a loud bar nearby. The room smells of expensive perfume, heavy cigarette smoke, and gin. The man is relaxed, smiling. He is absolutely certain he controls the night. He doesn't know that a colossal dose of lysergic acid diethylamide, an amount no doctor would ever prescribe, has already dissolved in his drink. Nor does he know that right now, just 3 feet away, sitting in absolute darkness behind a massive antique mirror on the wall, is a heavy-set man wearing glasses. This man is lazily sipping an ice-cold martini from a glass pitcher, smoking a Cuban cigar, and balancing a notepad stamped with the seal of the United States government on his knee. The man in the bedroom suddenly falls silent. His breathing turns heavy. The contours of the antique furniture begin to blur. The walls start to pulse, and reality shatters with a deafening crack. The observer behind the glass takes a slow drag of his cigar and jots down the first line of his report. The Cold War of the early 1950s created a unique moral calculus, one in which traditional human ethics were viewed as an unforgivable weakness. In those years, the Central Intelligence Agency was an absolute, impregnable, and invisible fortress. They had no funding issues, no ethics committees, and most importantly, zero civilian oversight. Inside the long, sterile corridors of the Langley headquarters, paranoia reigned at the highest levels of government. To American generals, Soviet and Chinese intelligence agencies seemed like omnipotent puppeteers, capable of erasing and reprogramming the human mind. When American pilots returning from Korean POW camps made chillingly calm statements supporting the communist regime on camera, CIA analysts came to what they believed was the only logical conclusion. The communists had invented a truth serum, a system of absolute mind control. To win this invisible war, where bullets had been replaced by ideology, American intelligence needed its own ultimate weapon. A weapon capable of cracking the most secure and complex safe in the world without firing a single shot: the human brain. They wanted a chemical key, a drug that would force any enemy spy to spill every state secret during interrogation, break his will, make him as pliable as wax, and then wipe his memory of the conversation entirely. On paper, the CIA's security protocols and scientific approach looked flawless. It was a massive, closed ecosystem made up of brilliant scientific minds, dozens of shell foundations, unlimited budgets, and top-secret classifications. The project was codenamed MKUltra. The system felt like a monolith, ready to rewire human nature itself in the name of national security. At the center of this giant machine were 2 men who became the undisputed architects of controlled chaos. The first was Sidney Gottlieb, a brilliant chemist and the head of the CIA's technical services staff. Gottlieb was a walking paradox, a quiet, club-footed intellectual who spent his free time meditating, drinking raw milk on his farm, and growing rare flowers. Yet, during the workweek, this same man developed lethal poisons for political assassinations worldwide and sought methods to completely erase the human personality. Gottlieb was obsessed with a newly synthesized Swiss compound, LSD. He understood one critical thing: clinical trials on volunteers, college students, or prison inmates would never yield clean, objective data. A test subject sitting in a sterile white hospital room, surrounded by doctors with clipboards, knows something is being done to him. His psyche is subconsciously prepared to defend itself. A real truth serum had to work flawlessly in the wild, on people who had absolutely no suspicion of chemical interference. Gottlieb needed a real-world testing ground. The second architect was George Hunter White. White was no refined academic. He was a veteran of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, a brutal, cynical, and ruthless cop from the bygone Prohibition era. White had served in the OSS during World War II. He was a man who had once strangled a Japanese spy with his bare hands and calmly went out for coffee afterward. He loved unchecked power, expensive liquor, women, and the feeling of absolute godlike impunity. Gottlieb and White were a match made in hell. The scientist needed a man without moral breaks to do the dirty work on the streets. White needed an official, top-level excuse to play God with other people's lives. Their unnatural alliance birthed an operation codenamed Midnight Climax. The anatomy of this scheme is staggering in its primitive, diabolical efficiency and its total contempt for the law. In the spring of 1955, George White arrived in San Francisco and rented a spacious apartment at 225 Chestnut Street. Money flowed generously through a chain of front research foundations to hide the government's paper trail. This ordinary-looking apartment was transformed into an unrivaled engineering masterpiece of domestic espionage. In the bedroom, workers with special security clearances cut out a section of the wall and installed a massive two-way mirror. Behind this glass, they built a cramped observation room lined with soundproofing panels. The era's best-hidden microphones were wired into the baseboards, electrical outlets, and lampshades. White approached his own comfort with unbelievable cynicism. He installed a portable toilet and a cooler full of ice in the observation booth, ensuring he wouldn't have to miss a single second of the victim's agony. But the main cog in this machine was the recruitment of the operatives. White didn't use career intelligence officers or ideologically vetted female agents. He went straight to the city's underbelly. He enlisted professional San Francisco sex workers, many of whom had legal troubles and whom he kept on a tight leash. The women were paid $100 in cash per night, a massive sum for the time. Their job was terrifyingly simple. They were to find a presentable, respectable man at a bar, bring him back to the Chestnut Street apartment under the guise of continuing the evening, and, at the right moment, discreetly slip a clear liquid from a small glass vial into his drink. The women weren't told what they were administering. Asking questions was strictly forbidden. The trap slammed shut, and the assembly line of madness went into full production. For an entire decade, the CIA's secret government brothels hosted new, unsuspecting guests every single night. The victims were random traveling salesmen, low-level bureaucrats, tourists, businessmen, and even military men. The dose of the drug poured into their bourbon or gin was entirely unregulated. Often, the women poured in more than necessary just to get the job done faster. Men expecting a cliché, adulterous fling were suddenly plunged into an endless chemical hell. They suffered violent panic attacks. The room would distort around them. They lost all sense of time, forgot their own names, and experienced primal, animalistic terror. They cowered in the corners of the room, weeping, praying aloud, and begging invisible demons for help. All the while, on the other side of the glass sat George White, an agent of the United States government. He sipped his chilled martini, relishing his power, and pedantically logged every detail in his journal. At what minute did the subject lose touch with reality? How did his speech change? How heavily was he sweating? Was he able to answer the leading questions asked by the women, who, per White's instructions, were trying to pry personal information out of him? There was absolutely no medical oversight. There wasn't a team of paramedics standing by in the next room with antidotes and sedatives. No one checked these men's medical histories before the experiment. If a victim with a bad heart had suffered a massive coronary, it would have been cold-bloodedly written off as the cost of doing business. The state was treating its own citizens like lab rats. The genius and the sheer ugliness of this plan lay entirely in the choice of victims. It was the perfect, mathematically calculated, self-protecting crime. White and Gottlieb understood human psychology better than any Ivy League professor. They knew that a married man, a respected member of conservative 1950s society, who had picked up a prostitute in a dive bar and ended up drugged with unknown substances in a stranger's apartment, would never, ever go to the cops. He had too much to lose. His reputation, his family, his mortgage, his career, all of it would be destroyed in a single day. Waking up the next morning on a cold sidewalk or in a cheap motel room with a splitting headache and fragments of nightmare memories, that man would much rather believe he had suffered a temporary nervous breakdown from overwork, or that he'd been served bad liquor. Out of the hundreds of test subjects over the project's lifespan, not a single one filed an official police report. The CIA's most impenetrable layer of operational security was built on the strongest, cheapest material on Earth: deep human shame. But power, unchecked by the law, inevitably corrupts those who wield it. Over time, Gottlieb and White's purely scientific interest morphed into outright sadistic entertainment. George White's diaries, declassified decades later, reveal that he genuinely reveled in his position. In one entry, he asked a frighteningly blunt rhetorical question: where else could a red-blooded American boy lie, betray, cheat, steal, and ruin lives with absolute impunity, all with the official sanction and blessing of the nation's highest leaders? The experiments began spilling out of the safe house. Feeling untouchable, CIA agents started slipping LSD to entirely random people in restaurants, on public beaches, and in bar restrooms. They even started experimenting on their own colleagues from other federal agencies. Their paranoia and sense of omnipotence led to genuine tragedies. One documented victim was a deputy U.S. Marshal named Wayne Ritchie. At a Christmas party, his colleagues secretly spiked his cocktail with a massive dose of acid. Under the influence of a sudden, inexplicable high, the officer suffered a severe bout of paranoia. He became convinced that assassins were hunting him. In a state of delirium, he grabbed his service weapon and attempted to rob a bar to get cash for a flight out of town. He was arrested, his law enforcement career was permanently ruined, and his psyche was shattered. The agents who destroyed his life simply stood by, making notes in their little black books. Then there was Frank Olson, a civilian scientist working on contract for the Department of Defense. At an off-site government retreat, Sidney Gottlieb secretly slipped LSD into a bottle of expensive liqueur that the attendees were drinking. Olson, unaware he had been dosed, spiraled into a violent psychosis. After several days of crippling depression, insomnia, and paranoia, he threw himself through the closed window of a 13th-floor hotel room in New York City. For 22 years, CIA leadership hid the true cause of his death from his wife and children, writing it off as a routine nervous breakdown. The system was confident it was burying its secrets deep beneath the concrete of national interests. But there is no such thing as a perfect crime. The architects of chaos failed to account for the passage of time and banal human negligence. By 1973, the political climate in the United States had radically shifted. The Watergate scandal was ruthlessly shaking Washington. Investigative journalists were tearing the veil off government secrets, and public distrust of the establishment was boiling over. CIA Director Richard Helms realized the noose was rapidly tightening around the intelligence community. He knew that sooner or later Senate committees would start asking uncomfortable questions about what the agency had been up to for the last 2 decades. In a fit of panic, Helms issued an unprecedented order designed to erase Operation Midnight Climax and the entirety of MKUltra from human history. He ordered the physical destruction of every single document related to the project. For weeks, heavy-duty industrial shredders and incinerators at CIA headquarters ran around the clock. All of chemist Gottlieb's lab journals, all of the sadistic White's handwritten diaries, miles of magnetic tape recording the moans of the test subjects, every list of recruited women, all of it was reduced to gray ash. The system masterfully covered its tracks. Helms exhaled. No one was ever supposed to know about the secret brothels, the broken mines, or how the government had turned the streets of American cities into its own personal torture laboratory. They destroyed the entire scientific baseline. They burned every operational summary and agent report. On paper, the cover-up was flawless, but the spies' brilliant, multi-layered conspiracy shattered against the grayest, most boring, and predictable thing in the world. They forgot about government accounting. 4 years later, in 1977, the United States was swept by a wave of investigations led by Senator Frank Church's committee. Young, tenacious congressional investigators were digging through mountains of paperwork, desperate for any thread leading to illegal intelligence activities. And one day, they stumbled upon 7 boxes of documents. These boxes weren't locked in a secret CIA vault. They were sitting in a dusty financial archive in a completely different building. The destruction order simply never reached them because they weren't filed under secret operations. They were filed under routine budget expenditures. The investigators popped the cardboard lids. Inside, there were no blueprints for world domination, no chemical weapon formulas, no lists of foreign spies. Inside were boring, yellowed receipts, invoices for the purchase of two-way mirrors, complete with exact dimensions, leases for luxury apartments on Telegraph Hill, signed by frontmen, receipts for hundreds of bottles of premium gin and martini vermouth, and most importantly, neatly filed financial vouchers proving regular, weekly cash payments to unidentified women, drawn directly from the United States federal budget. The CIA's accounting department, staffed by pedantic bean counters in gray suits, had scrupulously documented every single crime of Operation Midnight Climax down to the last cent, simply because those were the rules of financial reporting. A brilliant conspiracy, shielded by the highest political connections and top-secret classifications, collapsed because some nameless clerk had diligently filed away the receipts for booze and hookers. The fallout from this revelation shocked the world, but justice proved to be an illusion. Sidney Gottlieb, a man who had mutilated hundreds of lives, quietly retired, avoided all criminal prosecution, and spent his final days doing charity work, helping sick children at a leper colony in India. George White died quietly in his bed from liver cirrhosis, having never answered a single question in a court of law. Not a single architect of this chemical concentration camp spent a minute in a prison cell. The U.S. government quietly paid out meager, out-of-court financial settlements to the few victims whose names lawyers managed to indirectly piece together. The case was hastily closed and shoved into the deepest drawer of history. The exact number of ruined lives will remain forever unknown. We will never know how many men ended up in psychiatric wards with false diagnoses of schizophrenia, how many families were torn apart, or how many people took their own lives after a single night in the apartment on Chestnut Street. They built a system meant to protect the free Western world from totalitarian tyranny, but in fighting that battle, they became the most inhumane, terrifying nightmare for their own citizens. This story coldly proves one undeniable fact. The real threat to society doesn't come from foreign spies with fake passports and bombs. The real threat comes from men in expensive suits, armed with unlimited budgets, zero oversight, and a fanatical, unshakable belief in their own righteousness. And now, the ultimate question, the one the investigations never truly answered. Do you actually believe that the discovery of those 7 boxes of receipts in 1977 was a genuine, stupid, clerical error by the accounting department? Or did the CIA leadership intentionally leave those shameful receipts for alcohol and escorts behind, feeding the Senate and the press a dirty, scandalous, but easily digestible story, to forever hide the real, far more terrifying, and highly successful results of their mind control research?